Thank you. Let us proceed to the 10-minute rule bill. Joanna Cherry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to amend the Scotland Act 1998 to grant to the Scottish Parliament legislative competence in respect of the role and functions of the Scottish law officers and for connected purposes. Madam Deputy Speaker, my bill is designed to give the Scottish Parliament the power to amend the role of Scotland's law officers, including dividing the role of the Lord Advocate into two separate jobs, one as head of Scotland's prosecution service and the other as a Minister of the Scottish Government and its chief legal adviser. The present Lord Advocate performs both roles, and both legal scholars and politicians are becoming increasingly concerned that this may give rise to a conflict of interest, or at the very least the perception of a conflict of interest. I wish to stress that no criticism of the current or previous Lord Advocate, or indeed of the current SNP government, should be implied, because the dual role of the Lord Advocate is a historical anachronism which predates devolution. The dual role was rubber-stamped by the devolution settlement, and to date no Conservative or Labour government has attempted reform. I believe reform is long overdue. The Scottish National Party manifesto for the 2021 Holyrood election promised to consult on separating the roles of the Lord Advocate, and the Scottish Government has committed to review the role of the Lord Advocate by the end of the current Parliament, the initial phase of which is to be informed by expert research, and I understand that a report on the expert research is to be published soon. However, because of reservations under the Scotland Act, it's not open to the Scottish Parliament to either create a new law officer or a new public prosecutor. That is why my bill is necessary. Given that both criminal and civil justice are devolved matters, it is only right that the Scottish Parliament decide how best to reform the role of the Lord Advocate. Furthermore, it is the Scottish Parliament who will be furnished with the necessary expert research that's been commissioned by the Scottish Government. And if we are to take at face value assurances from the United Kingdom Government that they don't wish to undermine the devolved settlement and that they respect the powers that have been devolved, then I believe they should leave it to Scotland's Parliament to carry out the task of reforming the role of Scotland's law officers. Now, the Lord Advocate is the senior of the two Scottish law officers, and the other is the Solicitor General. The Lord Advocate is both a minister in the Scottish Government and the holder of a historic office going back many hundreds of years, the role of Lord Advocate, and it now has a range of functions associated with the maintenance of the rule of law and the proper administration of justice. And the Lord Advocate is head of the systems of criminal prosecution and investigation of deaths. She is also principal legal adviser to the Scottish Government. She represents the Scottish Government in civil proceedings and the public interest in a range of statutory and common law, civil and constitutional functions. The Scotland Act states that in relation to criminal prosecutions and the investigation of deaths, the Lord Advocate must act independently of other ministers and indeed of any other person, and I believe that the Lord Advocates have acted independently. The former First Minister, the Right Honourable Alex Salmond, took steps to underline this independence by depoliticising the appointment process and providing that the law officers should not routinely attend cabinet meetings. In my opinion, there was a downside of this, and that was that it deprived the Scottish Government of the benefit of advice from a lawyer who shares their political persuasion. Such advice was previously available to other governments, and it is something from which the United Kingdom Government benefits. The Lord Advocates appointed by the King on the recommendation of the First Minister with the agreement of the Scottish Parliament, and unlike other ministers, cannot be removed from office by the First Minister without the approval of the Parliament. The Lord Advocate also has an important role in relation to ensuring that legislation passed by the Scottish Parliament is within its legislative competence, and she has powers under the Scotland Act in relation to the resolution of legal questions about the devolved powers of ministers and the Parliament. And we saw this in action recently during the referral to the United Kingdom Supreme Court on the question of whether the Scottish Parliament had the power to hold a second independence referendum. So accountability to the Scottish Parliament is an important aspect of the Lord Advocate's constitutional role. She may but need not be a member of the Scottish Parliament, and if not an MSP, she is entitled to participate in the proceedings of the Parliament, but she may not vote. She can therefore be questioned by MSPs about the exercise of her functions. although she's not required to answer questions or produce documents in relation to the operation of the criminal prosecution system in specific cases. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a tension between the principle that the Lord Advocate should be both independent in her capacity as Chief Prosecutor, but also politically accountable as a law officer, and the Venice Commission of the Council of Europe, which advises Member States on rule of law issues, recommends that Member States take steps to ensure that their state prosecution systems are seen to act independently of Parliament and Government. For the record, I think the Scottish state prosecution system does operate independently of Parliament and Government, but because the two roles are held by the one person, there's always the perception that that might not be the case. Now, elsewhere in the United Kingdom and in the Republic of Ireland, the two roles are held by different people, which avoids any possible conflict of interest or the perception of such a conflict. In England, there's an Attorney General who is a member of the government of the day, and quite separately a Director of Public Prosecutions who is appointed by a public appointment process completely independent of government. And of course, there's the third office of the Lord Chancellor, who performs some constitutional functions, and the experts currently advising the Scottish Government might also want to think about something akin to this third role for some of the Lord Advocate's functions under the Scotland Act. Now, concern about the potential conflicts in the role of the Lord Advocate has increased in recent times because of some high-profile cases, including the Scottish Government's handling of complaints against Alex Salmond, the malicious prosecution scandal in relation to prosecutions over the takeover of Rangers Football Club, and the police investigation into SNP finances. But it's very important to understand that similar concerns have been raised in the past. In the early days of the devolved Scottish Parliament, when Labour were the government, in the wake of the resignation of a Labour-appointed Lord Advocate, there was a big debate about the potential conflict of interest, prompted by concerns around the Lockerbie prosecution, the growing importance of the European Convention on Human Rights under devolution, and the Lord Advocate's then role in some judicial appointments. And there was considerable disquiet back in 2000 that the Lord Advocate was performing the role of politician, prosecutor and judge maker. Now, since 2002, the appointment of judges in Scotland has been the responsibility of an independent panel. The Lord Advocate has no involvement in that, and so her role doesn't really, as some people sometimes say, pose a problem for the constitutional principle of the separation of powers. This is not an issue of separating powers between executive, legislature and judiciary, because the Lord Advocate doesn't really have anything to do with the judiciary. Now, if we come back to present times, the report of the Scottish Parliament's inquiry into the Scottish Government handling of harassment complaints found that events around those issues had showed, and I quote, a long-standing tension in the dual roles of the Lord Advocate, and they said that public perception was important. And I believe, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it is very important that the role of Chief Prosecutor in any state be free from all suspicion of political interference. And I stress, I'm not saying there has been political interference. I want to protect the role from the suspicion that there might be. I also believe it's very important that Scottish governments of whatever political hue have the benefit of a legal advisor who shares their political views while still giving independent advice. That, after all, is what the UK government, the Welsh government and the Irish governments enjoy. Their law officers are usually parliamentarians from the same party as the government of the day. Now, as I said, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Scottish Government has accepted that there's a case for separating the two roles of the Lord Advocate, and I'm delighted that both the current Secretary of State for Scotland, who is in his place, and his shadow, who explained to me why he couldn't be in his place for this bill, both agree that there's a case for separating the two roles. And my bill also has support from the Liberal Democrats, the Alba Party, and from a distinguished Conservative backbencher, as well as SNP colleagues. So I hope that the existence of cross-party support means that this private member's bill has a chance of becoming law, leaving the final decision on the role of Scotland's law officers where it should be with the Scottish Parliament. And I beg to move, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many as that opinion say aye. Aye. On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare and bring in the bill?
Stevens, Douglas Chapman, Patricia Gibson, Carol Monaghan, Marion Fellows, Ronnie Cowan, Kenny McCaskill, Alistair Carmichael, Wendy Chamberlain, Christine Jardine, David Davis and myself, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Joanna Cherry.
Thank you. Scottish Law Officers Devolution Bill.
Second reading what day?
22nd of March, Madam Deputy Speaker.
22nd of March. Thank you. We